Welcome to Collision, the podcast where we discuss the fun and sometimes complicated collision of real life and trusting God. If you're curious or confused about how to engage the world we live in, we hope our conversation here helps. Now, let's get into this episode of Collision.
Well, welcome to Collision Season 2. James is with me here. I'm Matt Manning, and we're in Season 2. So, James, what is the best Season 2 on TV of all time?
Ozark Season 2.
Are you even qualified to do this?
I know, right? Yeah.
You're gonna give me a reason for it being Season 2 being the best.
Because it was ripe for resolution, and obviously for the next 4 seasons, it provided none. But you so needed it. Yep.
Yes. I think I would go with The Office. You know, Season 1, kind of, you were interested in it. Season 2, they made all the changes and it hooked you, and then it became an all-time great. Followed, I think, only by like Star Wars. You know, the second movie, that being A New Hope right there, right? So like those are right, I think they're for me. And so either one of those would be my answer to that. Well, we are in Season 2, and man, we've only been off the podcast airwaves for like 3 months, but so much has happened in our world. I mean, the Middle East broke out in war, COVID's in the news again. The Dodgers somehow figured out how to circumvent, salary restrictions in baseball. Christmas and New Year's have both come and gone. We're in the middle of the presidential rat race, and now we all have to worry about microplastics, whatever those things are, right? And so a ton has happened, but as we come together, maybe just take a moment just to share with what Collision is and what we're trying to accomplish on this podcast.
Absolutely. So the purpose of this podcast is really for us to talk openly as human beings and as pastors about the messy place of life where the ups and downs, the trials and the joys, and faith collide. And for all of us, regardless of your season of life, if you're raising kids or if you're without kids or you're single or you're an empty nester, figuring out where God is in the midst of that and even how to respond to the crazy things around us is hard. So we thought we would create a podcast where we talk about those things openly and not give the answers per se, but spur people on to think, pray, talk about how God would have them respond in the midst of their rhythms of life. Yeah,
and as we get into this Season 2, we have a lot of things that we want to accomplish in this. We're going to have discussions on poverty, AI, that's a huge deal, right? What it looks like in terms of gender and this whole conversation around gender and what does that look like? How do we navigate that as believers? We're going to talk really about kind of the rhythms of Jesus and what we see in his life, really kind of a podcast series within our podcast season is what that will be, right? Yeah. And then maybe towards the end of the year, maybe we'll talk about politics, but we'll see how all that shapes up. But that's where we're going. And today, really we just wanted to begin with a frank discussion on poverty and poverty issues and what does it look like when our real life kind of collides with the poverty of this world. And so maybe it's just a starting off place. James, how have you experienced poverty in your life, maybe your growing up years? Now living in Colorado, what's that look like for you?
Yeah. So the earliest recollection that I have, Matt, is when I was a kid, I grew up in Santa Cruz, California, really cool little beach town in Northern Cal. And we had a lot of hippies. And the reality is my earliest observation of poverty was that it was a voluntary thing, that I saw a lot of people that, the Grateful Dead weren't on the road anymore, and they kind of just picked the sidewalk and they asked for money. But they were choosing to live that way. And then over the years, living in Tennessee, traveling on the road, playing music around the country, and living in Seattle for the last 14 years before coming to Colorado, man, I've seen and I've experienced a lot of different perspectives. And even as a pastor, I mean, you and I have had countless people that we sit across from who it's a health diagnosis or an accident that that radically changes the direction of people's lives. And so you see it as not a voluntary thing, but man, like for any of us, it feels like poverty is just one situation away potentially for all of us.
Yeah, it's so scary to think that all of us are just one bad decision or one unfortunate circumstance away from really being wrecked financially and being at the whim of organizations and people to help. And, like you said, there's not a week that doesn't go by as pastors that we're not engaging with people who are living in poverty, people who are poor, people who are homeless. In fact, today I'm sitting in our community center, which is a whole place that was really started to bring flourishing mentally, emotionally, economically to this community in which we're in. And so, when it comes to Crossroads, and particularly our roles at Crossroads, we engage with the poor all the time. And one of the things, particularly since I think COVID happened, is just the amount of homelessness that has come into our area, from the parks to the major intersections on 104th and 120th, of people standing there asking for money, to the tents that are set up in our parking lots or on our property on a weekly basis. It's like we are right in the middle of poverty, and one of the things that Jesus said is that the poor, they'll always be with us. When you hear that from Jesus, what comes to your mind?
Yeah, I mean, it's a daunting thing because my personality, and I know yours, like we like a good challenge,
Right.
but so you can't win at defeating poverty. So it's an ongoing, it's a constant reality. So it's easy for me to kind of step away from it because I can't win it, and then it becomes a stewardship thing of like, how can I participate in a way that truly helps people get a little bit better in their physical or emotional or spiritual health, even if I know that I can't, buy their way out of the situation they're in.
Yeah, I think as Christians, that's one of the things that we probably see most often in our world, right? The poverty of this world. And probably, I would say for the majority of people, look at it and go, I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to do, right? Like am I supposed to give money to the guy on 120th? Am I to come along and give things away to the people that are staying in the tent? Should I allow them to stay, on my property? To the place of, should I give money to organizations that are helping with the poor? Should I give money to organizations that are around the world that are working with the poor? And as Christians, we really look at this, and there's something within us that just kind of struggles a little bit when it comes to how do we live our lives when our lives collide with poverty. And I think one of the most helpful places that I found in Scripture, at least that have helped me, is in the book of James, not Pastor James, but the brother of Jesus, James. And
way cooler.
way cooler. That's right. And so, one of the most famous passages, probably in all of the Scripture, we find in James, which is James 2:17, where James writes, "So faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead." Now, for those of us who, are in the church world and have been around church, we understand that ultimately, that we're saved by faith alone. That true saving faith is faith alone, that we cannot work for our salvation. And yet, at the same time, any of us who have lived our lives as believers, as Christians, know that faith that does not have works attached to it is probably not really saving faith. And that's the point that James is making here, right? That faith without movement doesn't exist. Faith without works is dead. And so, for most of us, we want to be a good Christian in terms of what James is talking about here. And as we try to understand this, we go, okay, so being a good Christian, that means that I'm gonna be a good husband, right? I'm gonna pray. I'm gonna go to church. I'm gonna be a good dad, right? I'm gonna be honest and have integrity and work. And all of those are really good applications of that verse, but they're all secondary, because as you read through James, one of the things within the context of that is just a little bit before that verse, he actually talks about the religion that's pure before God is actually visiting orphans and widows in their affliction. And then he goes on and he tells this story that if a rich guy and a poor guy show up in your church and you treat the rich guy, like with all of this, excitement, and you give him the best seat and you tell the poor person to sit on the back, like there's something actually evil about you in that. And then he gets to another story, and he basically says that, if a brother or sister, a believer comes to you and they're hungry, and you say, hey, just go over there and warm up and get your fill, that actually, what good does that do them if you haven't actually fed them in this? And so, as we look at the context of this faith without works is dead, the works that James is talking about is all within the context of poverty, right? Caring for widows and orphans in their affliction, which those two segments were nothing economically. They were nobodies in society. Showing the poor respect and honor, caring for the material needs of people like food and clothing. And point blank, James says that, look, if you say that you have faith in Jesus and your works are not being demonstrated in the lives of the poor, then you're either a fool or you're a liar, and judgment will be without mercy for those who have shown no mercy. Pretty powerful statement there at the end. And so, as we kind of talk about this, like taking all of that in, like what are your insights into that?
Yeah, so, first off, I'm way nicer than the James of the Bible, because that's some pretty intense stuff.
What I just heard is that you're better than the brother of Jesus.
Well, yeah, okay, I take that back. Well, first off, I'm way more delicate than the brother of James, because, man, those are some pretty intense words. In a couple sentences, he kind of slays and slices and dices. But really, for me, what it's saying is that when we experience the grace and mercy of God in our lives, the byproduct should be that we want to pass it on. We want to pay it forward. We want to be a conduit for God's love and not just a recipient. And I think in our unique cultural moment, that's really hard, because faith is a really personal thing in our culture. We have a lot of people that think it means my prosperity and God's blessing on me, and that's right. And that's not what the Bible teaches. That we become ministers of reconciliation, as Paul says in 2 Corinthians, right? That we get to join God in this amazing work. And what a privilege. So he's basically saying, hey, if your faith is not producing that in your heart, like, do a reboot, right? Because there's something not connecting.
Yeah, the privilege is pretty fantastic in that. And I think that when we talk about joining into what Jesus is doing, and particularly like that moment where we come to our place in salvation, that we realize how poor we actually are, right? Like when we think back to Jesus, our Savior, the Messiah, right? Like he was born into this world poor. He was born in a feeding trough in a manger, right? His mom and dad brought pigeons to his dedication, which was the poor person's offering. Through his adult years, he wandered around homeless, right? He got to the end of his ministry in Jerusalem by borrowing a room in order to have the Passover feast, which was like Thanksgiving in our culture. And then when he dies, he's actually thrown into a borrowed tomb that wasn't even his grave to be buried in, right? Like all of Jesus's life is this picture of poverty. And I just think of, like, in the context of my own life, that the way for Jesus to help me understand my spiritual poverty and the spiritual riches that I have was for him to leave the throne room of God and get out of his eternal riches into material poverty. And Jesus said, look, I'm the one who deserves all the glory and the honor, and went to the cross and faced, condemnation so that we could avoid the condemnation that was so deserved to us, right? So that at the end, that we actually get to receive glory and honor because of Jesus in our own lives. And so when I begin to really think that through, and I sit back, I start to realize how impoverished I actually am spiritually. And whatever I have materially is only because it's a blessing from God. And so I think that when we begin to truly understand and unpack the gospel, that the gospel just doesn't impact our lives like, where do we go when we die?
Yeah.
but it has huge implications on how do we live now, and what does it look like when our lives actually do collide with the impoverished. And so the question then becomes like, then what do we do? Like what do we do in that? And one of the great resources that I read years ago was a book called When Helping Hurts, and it's by a guy named Steve Corbell. And if you haven't ever read, have you read it, James?
Oh yeah, loved it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's totally worth anybody's time to read it. But the book is basically, it's extremely easy to get involved in the life of the impoverished and actually do things that actually makes it worse over time, the poverty worse over time. And so, as you read that book, James, what were some of like the awakening moments in your life? Because I had a few, and I'll share them in a moment, where it was like I read that book and I was like, oh no, what have I done?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because the biggest aha for me was that most of my giving was actually selfish. Like I gave because it made me feel good, and I could kind of check the box. And especially, I learned, like at a turn lane, when you roll your window down and you give a guy a couple bucks, you can feel like I did my part. But kind of the disengaging that the spiritual part of Jesus, what do you want me to do in this situation? And over the years, like I've experienced growth I typically ride my bike around everywhere, and I've experienced Jesus say, hey, go talk to that guy and hear his story or help out but a lot of times it's easy to not engage God, to just give a couple bucks or trust the system to take care of people. So yeah, it at the core for me, it really revealed a lot of my giving was to relieve, I don't know if it's middle class guilt or what, but it made me feel better to go back to my safe home and lock the door and close the garage door behind me.
Yeah. For me, it put a lot of things in perspective for me. One of the great frustrations that I kind of lived with in my life is, there would be people who would come here, and one guy once while we were talking actually took out a list of all the food banks in the area and the places that he could get help and what days it was and what he could get where and all of the stuff throughout this area. And what I realized on that day is like he had the game worked out. He was playing the game and he had it worked out. And there was like this frustration kind of like in me. And when I read that book, I realized that strategically thinking about this, that we created a whole system of handouts instead of hand-ups, right? Like the entire system that we had designed in this church was about giving someone a handout, and which, I think handouts are a necessary part of life, right? It's in that emergent circumstances. But then how do we even think as believers beyond that and actually help people take a step up, right? So that they're not beholden to the poverty in which they're living in now. And once that began to like make a shift in my mind, then things really begin to make sense for me in terms of the poor. I was able to actually have empathy, is the way I would say it, for their situation. That judgment was didn't come as quickly in those moments, for which I was thankful. In that, because one of the really life-altering moments of my life is that when I was in seminary, my wife and I, we were poor, right? Like maybe we were just right? We couldn't even have the R onto it. That's how poor we were. And yet, we gave, and every Thanksgiving, we would get a Thanksgiving box, and we would make the sacrifice to put together this Thanksgiving box. And we got somebody in the church, and so we put together our box, and we drive over there to drop it off. And as I'm walking in, they have a Yukon in the driveway, and we're walking up, and their door's open, and I could see inside that they had this 60-inch TV. And at home, Sarah and I, we were watching this little 13-inch TV was what we had. And here I'm find myself gripping the box, tighter and tighter. And we rung the doorbell, and the dad didn't even get off the couch to come see us. He actually just yelled at his kids, and his kids came there, and, we said, hey, happy Thanksgiving. And we gave him the box. And I was so just full of anger I'm not sure it was righteous, but I felt like it was righteous thing during that moment. And I drove to the church to tell the pastor what had happened, and like, man, you gotta cross these guys off the list, like never again, kind of thing, right? And he just looked at me and he said, Matt, I think all that God calls us to be is faithful. Like we're not going to get to heaven and he's going to go, you know what, that poor person got you, shame on you. It'll be, you were faithful with the things that I asked you to be faithful with. Can you be content in that? And so that was kind of the beginning of that lesson, coming alongside When Helping Hurts, and then putting that together with another book called A Hole in Your Gospel. God really began to shape me in this idea of what does it look like to come alongside those who are poor without judgment, without just making their situation worse, but really coming in a way that you can actually make a difference.
Yeah. Well, and for me, like along those same lines, it exposed the black holes in my theology based on my upbringing. So my dad swore up and down that there was a verse in the Bible that said, God helps those who help themselves. And he was really upset when he realized it's not in there.
Right.
But growing up in a house that it's kind of like you sleep in the bed that you make, right? And like you and Sarah, man, my wife and I have been like so fiscally responsible from the early days of marriage. And the reality is over the years, we really haven't changed our lifestyle all that much because we found joy and we found, a satisfaction in that, which is a gift unto itself. But just that experience of the situation that people are in that it's a byproduct of the decisions that they made, like the big screen TV. It's like, gosh, you could probably buy your kid a jacket for winter if you didn't get that in the $200 a month cable package.
Right.
But to your point, I mean, for you to make the shift out of that mode into I'm being obedient to you, God, and I'm actually putting a firewall up for my judgment. I mean, it kind of reminds me of that beautiful thing in Ted Lasso, where it was like, I realize be curious, not judgmental, right?
Yes.
That amazing dart scene where it's like, I want to be curious about your story. And I think spiritually speaking, that's really important for us to do because it's so easy to be judgmental or make assumptions, but that a Ted Lassoism of like, I want to be curious about you.
Yeah. And that changes everything in terms of the way that we really interact with people, right? Regardless of their economic status in the world, the way that we deal with people of really going, man, what is your story and how is God working in your life? Because we believe that everybody has God working in their lives, and so what does it look like to see that in people? When it comes to, everything that you just kind of spoke about, and what we've been speaking about really is kind of the impetus of the center that I'm sitting in here, right? Of looking at the community that we're in and going, how can we actually bring flourishing to this community? How can we bring holistic flourishing here? And so this center, while it does a lot of things from ESL and teaching, people who do not know the English language, English, to, bikes and, the More Better Bikes that is here and everything in between from teenagers who are, regular teens, helping them understand what the gospel is to teenagers who are in really rough situations and getting help. Like all of that's happening here at the center, which is a really cool thing to watch happen, that we as a church are coming around side and really going, man, we want to make a difference in this community. One of the other things that I think about when I think about this discussion is a couple named Chris and Gina Garcia. James, you had when you were the North Glen campus pastor, you got to walk with them for a couple of years and maybe just like share their story personally, how they're engaging poverty within their own life.
Oh, just amazing story. They didn't have a lot of money. He was a tradesman and worked crazy hard. But I think once a month in the wintertime, they would put these care bags together
Don't worry, James. I'll pick it up from here. So they would go down the South Platte Trail. They would walk. They would give these bags away. And as they gave these bags away, they would actually come alongside and they would pray for the people. They would walk with them. They would find out their story. Just amazing. And as that ministry actually began to grow, it grew in such a way that all of their neighbors started participating in it. And pretty soon you had this like whole suburb of people like participating in helping alleviate a small part of poverty, showing people that they care. And it became quite amazing in that. And those two guys, oh man, they're my heroes. One of the other things is that we do as a church is Compassion International. Around the world, poverty is defined by living on less than $1.50 a day, which even as Americans, it's hard for us to even like comprehend what it would look like to live on $45 a month. Or if you had 48, that somehow you're not impoverished, but world statistics is less than $1.50 a day. And one of the cool things that we've done as a church is we've gone into a community in Guatemala. We've launched a church there, a community center and working alongside Compassion to really sponsor, 150 kids currently. Hopefully that's going to go closer to 300 after the next couple of weeks, and of coming alongside these families that are the very definition of poor in our world and going, this is what it looks like for us to globally interact with people who are, living in impoverished situations. And so hopefully as we kind of talk today, you can kind of get some thoughts around what it looks like for you to be engaged in poverty. And, I think we're about at the end, and I can see that James on our podcast is completely frozen with just the goofiest smile ever. And I think that I could say whatever I wanted, and he couldn't. Oh, he's back. Hey.
I'm back.
And so... So James, maybe hopefully the internet holds just for a moment here, but you have any last words on as we close up this conversation on poverty?
Yeah. So my encouragement to our listeners is really me being vulnerable and honest. Start with your own heart. I, for one, I just got back from Portland, Oregon, and I saw how a lot of the social services in our cities and stuff are not alleviating the problem. We're spending millions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, and it's easy for me to look at homelessness and no traction, or even immigration, and 7 million people who are now fighting with the homeless people in Denver for those same services. And it's easy at a heart level for me to kind of think, the government created this, it's their problem. And the reality is Jesus doesn't give me that out. So I'm wrestling there, I'm praying there, I'm angry there, and I'm clutching my wallet there. So, so I guess my encouragement is just be honest in your own heart and ask the Spirit of God to move and to reveal and to help you break through so the generosity of God can flow through you, because we're all learning in this process together.
Yeah, those are really good words, James. So as we close up today, I want all of our listeners to know that in a couple of weeks, we're going to have a really great interview with the voice of Collision. And Joel will be with us just to share his story. So it'll be awesome, something you want to tune into. And if you're looking for a church home and you're in the Denver area, we'd encourage you to come visit us. You can find out all the information that you want to know about Crossroads at crossroadsabc.com. And we are just about to step into what we're calling Chris's Bad Idea, a sermon series on end times. And so if you're interested in end times and knowing what that's all about, you can join us, whether it be online or in person. So, hey, James, thanks for being a part of this today. Man, look forward to season 2 and all the conversation that we're going to have together.
See you guys.
Thank you for listening to Collision. This podcast is a production of Crossroads Church in Thornton, Colorado. For more excellent content, please visit crossroadsabc.com.